Of course not, Trey. I do think that being a parent actually has a profound effect on somebody's perspective, and we should honor and respect that. But there are a whole host of people who don't have children for a whole host of reasons, and they certainly are great people who can participate fully in the life of this country. And that's not what I said, Trey. If you look at what the left has done, they have radically taken this out of context and, in fact, aggressively lied about what I've said. What I do think is true, Trey, is that the left has increasingly become explicitly anti-child and anti-family.
All right, look, the problem for Vance is that there may be no real context that can explain it away. We're not the left. We're not taking it out of context. I just played you what he said. Now, doubling down usually works for Donald Trump. But is it even fair for me to be saying it's doubling down? You heard what he said. Joining me now, Larry Elder, former presidential candidate and co-chair of the new national PAC, Make America Just Again, and Kristal Knight. She's a political strategist who worked on the presidential campaigns of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Larry, let me start with you. I mean, do you think it is fair to characterize what JD Vance is doing to some degree as doubling down?
I don't think so. I think he's trying to explain that what he was saying is that people who have children, and by extension grandchildren, have, quote, more skin in the game. Now, I don't have kids, and I had a cat for a very long period of time. My mother felt the way he does. My father felt the way he does. My pastor feels the way he does. A lot of people feel that way. I think we're being very, very thin-skinned about this. But every minute we're talking about this, we're not talking about the fact that the average family of four is spending $1,200 a month more for the same goods and services as that family bought 3.5 years ago. We're not talking about the fact that gas prices are up 50%. We're not talking about 8 million people in the country illegally. We're not talking about our enemies being aggressive because of what happened in Afghanistan. Every minute we're talking about this is a minute we're not talking about the issues that the American people care about, and therefore the left has succeeded.
That's fair, except that both sides play this game, right? They both get, I mean, Donald Trump is now putting out ads about things Donald Trump said, and she's saying that they're taken out of context, et cetera. But Kristal Knight, I mean, how big a deal do you think this is? I mean, to me, the greater risk for the Trump campaign is not, oh, their vice presidential candidate made a controversial comment. It's that this comment feeds into some of the issues that, in particular, suburban women may have with Donald Trump himself.
Absolutely. I think, to your opening around this topic, what JD Vance is doing is really alienating a large swath of the American public, which is a voting, portion of this public, which are women. But also, I think what he said in his last clip that you played was that there are a number of reasons that people either have kids or they cannot have children, but it doesn't determine their viability to contribute to the greatness of this country. But he did not apologize. And I think what he's doing and what the Trump campaign should do is have him go on and actually create and make an official apology, because I don't think that it helps the campaign. It doesn't help his candidacy. And it also doesn't help him win over the voters, particularly in that Midwestern part of the country and the Appalachia that he so greatly talks about in his book, when he talks about really alienating a large swath of the public because they are, quote unquote, anti-family.
Larry, why not just, I mean, to your point, right, to get this to go away, why not just issue some sort of just quick, look, if I could say it again, I wouldn't say it exactly the way I said it, but my point was blank. I'm sorry if I offended anyone. Isn't that a better way to go, to just make this go away?
It won't go away. They'll come up with some other reason to argue that Republicans are anti-women, Republicans are sexist. I ran for governor in California. Somebody dug out a column I wrote 23 years ago where I talked about a study where 25 questions were put to females and men on politics. Men knew more than women did in 15 questions. They knew the same in 9, and women only knew more than the men did in 1. And I quoted a female professor, left-wing, who said the reason women know less than men do about politics is they watch a lot of local news, quote, and watching local news makes you dumber, close quote. That was translated into Elder believes that women are not as smart as men. That's what they do. It doesn't matter what JD Vance says. They're going to still make the same argument. They won't drop it. They'll bring it up again and again and again in order to divert attention, as I said earlier, from things people care about. Are you better off now than you were 3.5 years ago? For most people, the answer is no, unless you're an illegal alien.
Well, you know,
Kristal, final thought on that?
The big thing here is we know that this campaign has already been polarized. There's so many, you know, topics and events that have happened in the last month, literally 30 days. And what we should expect is that the media should hold JD Vance accountable because he is running to be the vice president of these United States. And so I don't care if it was 3 years, 3 days, or 30 years ago. If it is something that is dealing with the voters of this country and how they cast their vote and how they cast their trust in potential candidates moving forward, it is absolutely fair play. And the media on both sides, regardless of where they stand, should question him and hold him accountable to his words.
Larry Elder and Kristal Knight, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.